Imagine this. It's a crisp autumn day in Chicago, 1982. A 12-year-old girl, Mary Kellerman, wakes up with a cold. Her parents give her an extra-strength Tylenol, a trusted household name for aches and pains. Within hours, she's dead. What her family didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this seemingly harmless capsule was a tiny, ticking time bomb laced with a lethal dose of potassium cyanide. This was just the beginning. The story of the Chicago Tylenol murders is more than just a crime. It's a chilling tale that unfolded across the suburbs, changing the way we think about the everyday products we bring into our homes. It's a mystery that, even decades later, remains officially unsolved and continues to send shivers down our spines. The tragic death of Mary Kellerman was quickly followed by another. Adam Janus, a postal worker, also took a Tylenol for a minor ache and collapsed. As his shocked family gathered to mourn, two more of his relatives, his brother Stanley and sister-in-law Teresa, took Tylenol from the same bottle, likely for headaches brought on by the sudden grief. They too tragically died. In a matter of hours, one family had lost 3 members. The common link was so simple, so mundane, that it was almost unbelievable. A bottle of Tylenol. As investigators started connecting the dots, a horrifying picture began to emerge. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The panic was just beginning to set in. Across the Chicago area, more victims surfaced. Mary Reiner, who had just given birth to her 4th child. Paula Prince, a flight attendant. Mary McFarland, which had a similar story. A minor ailment, a reach for a trusted remedy, and a sudden, inexplicable death. The city's medical examiners were baffled, until 2 heroic firefighters noticed the Janus family had all taken Tylenol. Tests confirmed their worst fears. The capsules weren't just tampered with, they were replaced with pure poison. The news exploded. Public service announcements blared from every television and radio. Do not use Tylenol? Police drove through neighborhoods with loudspeakers, warning residents to throw away their bottles. A city of millions was gripped by a new kind of fear, one that lurked not in dark alleys, but in their own medicine cabinets. The manufacturer, Johnson & Johnson, faced an unprecedented crisis. Their flagship product, with over a third of the pain reliever market, was now a symbol of death. Their response would become a masterclass in corporate responsibility. Without hesitation, they issued a massive nationwide recall of 31 million bottles of Tylenol, a move that cost them over $100 million. They were transparent with the public, taking out full-page ads and holding press conferences, prioritizing customer safety above all else. This wasn't about saving a product. It was about saving lives and restoring trust. They offered to replace every single bottle, no questions asked. In doing so, they didn't just manage a disaster. They set a new standard for how companies should act in a crisis. As the recall was underway, a massive investigation was launched. Law enforcement was in a race against time, trying to figure out who would do something so monstrous and why. The method was terrifyingly random. The poison bottles were purchased from different stores, the poison added, and then the bottles were returned to the shelves for unsuspecting customers to buy. This wasn't a targeted attack. It was an act of indiscriminate terror. The killer, or killers, had turned a common household item into a weapon. The FBI and local police departments pulled out all the stops, investigating hundreds of leads, but the perpetrator was like a ghost, leaving behind only heartbreak and fear. A few weeks into the investigation, a letter arrived at Johnson & Johnson's headquarters. It demanded $1 million to stop the killing. The letter led investigators to a man named James Lewis. He was a disgruntled former employee of a company whose owner's wife was a Tylenol victim, but he was living in New York City at the time. A nationwide manhunt ensued, and Lewis was eventually apprehended. He admitted to writing the extortion letter to exploit the crisis for money, but he vehemently denied being the actual poisoner. While he was convicted of extortion and served 13 years in prison, authorities could never definitively link him to the actual murders. The evidence simply wasn't there. He maintained his innocence regarding the poisonings until his death in 2023. With no definitive suspect for the killings, the mystery deepened. Who was the Tylenol terrorist? Was it James Lewis after all? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone who got away with it? Over the years, several other theories have been explored. One focused on a man who had a grudge against Johnson & Johnson. Another looked into a small group of individuals. In 2009, the FBI reopened the case, raiding James Lewis's home and taking DNA samples. They also retested evidence with modern forensic technology, hoping for a breakthrough. But despite the renewed effort and scientific advances, the case remains cold. The identity of the person who filled those capsules with cyanide is still unknown, leaving a wound in the heart of Chicago that is never fully healed. While the criminal case remains a frustrating open question, the legacy of the Tylenol murders is undeniable and far-reaching. The most visible change is on the shelves of every pharmacy and grocery store today. Before 1982, a simple foil seal under the cap was rare. After the crisis, tamper-evident packaging became the industry standard. Those cotton balls, foil seals, and plastic wraps on our medicine bottles are a direct result of this tragedy. Johnson & Johnson, wanting to bring Tylenol back, introduced new triple-sealed packaging and pioneered the switch from capsules to solid caplets, which are much harder to tamper with. This tragedy, as horrific as it was, fundamentally changed an entire industry and made consumer products significantly safer for all of us. The Tylenol crisis also serves as a powerful lesson in public health and crisis communication. The swift and decisive actions of the medical examiners who identified the poison, the media outlets that spread the warnings, and Johnson & Johnson's transparent response are credited with preventing an even greater loss of life. It showed the world how a corporation could act ethically and put people before profits, ultimately winning back consumer trust and making Tylenol even more successful than before. It's a case study still taught in business and public relations schools today. It reminds us that in times of crisis, honesty, speed, and responsibility are not just good ethics, they're good strategy. So, 40 years later, the Chicago Tylenol murders remain an unsolved puzzle. 7 innocent lives were lost, a city was terrorized, and an industry was forever changed. The person responsible may never be brought to justice, but the story serves as a chilling reminder of the vulnerability we all share and the importance of trust in the things we take for granted. It's a testament to the resilience of a community and a company that chose to do the right thing in the face of unimaginable horror. The legacy isn't just about the poison. It's about the protection that rose from the pain. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into fascinating and important historical events. Stay safe out there.
Have you ever been on a plane and heard a weird noise that made your heart skip a beat? Now, imagine you're on a flight, cruising at 17,000 feet, when suddenly there's an explosive bang. The cabin fills with fog, and you feel the plane start to nosedive. This isn't a scene from a disaster movie. This is the terrifying yet absolutely true story of British Airways Flight 5390, a story of chaos, quick thinking, and unbelievable human strength that saved 87 lives. On June 10, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 took off from Birmingham, England, heading for Malaga, Spain. It was a beautiful morning. In the cockpit were Captain Tim Lancaster and First Officer Alistair Aitchison. Both were highly experienced pilots. The flight attendants were preparing for the breakfast service, and the 81 passengers were settling in for their holiday flight. Everything was perfectly normal. Just 13 minutes after takeoff, as the plane climbed through 17,300 feet over Oxfordshire, the crew heard a sudden, deafening bang. The left windscreen panel, the one right in front of Captain Lancaster, had blown out. The explosive decompression was so powerful that it ripped the cockpit door off its hinges and slammed it into the control console. But that wasn't the worst part. The force of the air rushing out of the cockpit sucked Captain Lancaster halfway out of the window. His legs were caught on the flight controls, but his entire upper body was outside the aircraft. Being battered by winds of over 500 miles per hour at temperatures of -17 degrees Celsius. He was literally being frozen and battered against the top of the plane. Inside the cockpit, chaos reigned. Papers, manuals, and debris were flying everywhere. The sudden decompression had created a thick condensation fog, making it impossible to see. First Officer Alistair Aitchison, who had just unstrapped his shoulder harness to get comfortable, was now fighting to control a plane that was rapidly losing altitude and gaining speed. Just then, flight attendant Nigel Ogden, who was about to enter the cockpit, saw the unbelievable scene. He rushed in, grabbed Captain Lancaster's legs, and held on for dear life. He later described seeing the captain's head repeatedly hitting the side of the fuselage. Another flight attendant, John Heward, rushed in to help, strapping himself into the jump seat and helping Ogden hold on to the captain. They could see Lancaster's eyes were wide open and not blinking. They believed he was already gone, but they refused to let him go. They were afraid that if they released him, his body would fly into the left engine and cause a catastrophic failure. Meanwhile, First Officer Atchison was in the fight of his life. The autopilot had disengaged. The plane was in a dive, and the roaring wind made it almost impossible to hear air traffic control. The cockpit door was jammed on the throttle controls, causing the plane to accelerate as it descended. With incredible composure, Atchison managed to regain control of the aircraft, level it off, and begin a rapid descent to a lower altitude where the air was breathable. He made a distress call. "Mayday, Mayday, we have an emergency. We have had a windscreen blowout. The captain has been partially sucked out of the aircraft." You can only imagine the shock on the other end of that radio call. Air traffic controllers scrambled to clear a path for the crippled plane, guiding Atchison towards the nearest suitable airport, Southampton. The problem was, Atchison had never landed at Southampton before. It had a relatively short runway, not ideal for a BAC-111 aircraft in an emergency situation. He was flying the plane essentially blind, relying on instruments and the guidance of air traffic control, all while two of his crew members were physically holding on to his captain behind him. The flight attendants continued their heroic struggle. Nigel Ogden was starting to suffer from frostbite and exhaustion. Simon Rogers, another crew member, took over, strapping himself to the back of the pilot's chair and forming a human chain with the others to keep a firm grip on Lancaster. They held on, grimly determined, as Atchison navigated the approach. As the plane descended for landing, the crew faced a new horror. They realized that when they slowed down for the final approach, Captain Lancaster's body had slumped further down the outside of the aircraft, and his head was now directly in front of the left cockpit window, blocking Atchison's view. He had to perform the landing looking out of just the right side of the cockpit, a maneuver that requires immense skill and precision. Miraculously, Alistair Atchison executed a perfect landing at Southampton Airport. As the plane touched down, emergency crews who had been alerted to the bizarre and critical situation rushed to the scene. The moment the plane stopped, they got to work. The passengers, who had been kept calm by the remaining cabin crew, gave a round of applause, unaware of the life-and-death drama that had unfolded just feet away from them in the cockpit. And what about Captain Tim Lancaster? In a turn of events that defies belief, he was alive. Paramedics carefully pulled him back into the cockpit. He was suffering from severe frostbite, shock, and multiple fractures to his arm, wrist, and thumb, but he had survived being outside an airplane for over 20 minutes at high altitude. Nigel Ogden was treated for a dislocated shoulder and frostbite on his face and eye. So what caused this near catastrophe? The investigation revealed a shocking and simple maintenance error. The windscreen had been replaced just 27 hours before the flight. Of the 90 bolts used to secure it, 84 were the wrong diameter, they were too small. The remaining 6 were the correct diameter but were too short to get a proper grip. The immense pressure difference between the cabin and the outside air simply popped the window out like a cork from a bottle. It was a case of a tiny mistake leading to almost unimaginable consequences. The story of Flight 5390 is a testament to the incredible professionalism and bravery of the entire crew. First Officer Alistair Atchison's calm and skillful flying under extreme pressure saved the plane. The flight attendants, Nigel Ogden, John Heward, and Simon Rogers, showed incredible strength and courage by refusing to let their captain go, even when they thought he was lost. Alistair Aitchison, Nigel Ogden, and another flight attendant, Susan Gibbons, were awarded the Queen's Commendation for valuable service in the air. Aitchison also received a Polaris Award for his exceptional airmanship. Incredibly, after just a few months of recovery, Captain Tim Lancaster returned to flying. He continued his career with British Airways and retired in 2008. Alistair Aitchison also continued to fly until his retirement. This incident led to major changes in aviation safety procedures. It highlighted the importance of using correct parts in maintenance and led to changes in the design of aircraft windscreens, ensuring they are secured from the inside, making a blowout like this impossible. It's a powerful reminder that every tiny bolt and every single procedure matters when it comes to flying. So the next time you're on a flight, take a moment to appreciate the incredible team of professionals in the cockpit and cabin. They are trained for the unthinkable, and as the crew of Flight 5390 proved, they are capable of true heroism when it counts the most. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more amazing tales from aviation history. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.
Hollywood, the land of dreams. But also the backdrop for one of America's most chilling and infamous unsolved mysteries, the murder of Elizabeth Short, posthumously known as the Black Dahlia. This is a story of ambition, tragedy, and a phantom killer who vanished into the annals of crime history. Our story begins on January 15, 1947. A mother and her young daughter are out for a morning walk in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. They spot what they initially think is a discarded store mannequin lying in a vacant lot. As they approach, the horrifying reality sets in. It wasn't a mannequin at all. It was the body of a young woman, severed at the waist, drained of blood, and meticulously cleaned. Her face was grotesquely carved into a permanent haunting smile, a gruesome detail now known as the Glasgow smile. The scene was not just a murder, it was a macabre, ritualistic display. The victim was soon identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. She was a beautiful aspiring actress from Massachusetts who had drifted to California with stars in her eyes, like so many others. She had dark bouffant hair and was often seen wearing black clothing, which, combined with the popular film noir, The Blue Dahlia, released a year prior, led the press to dub her the Black Dahlia. This sensational nickname stuck, transforming her from a tragic victim into a mythic figure of Hollywood's dark side. The Los Angeles Police Department launched one of the largest investigations in the city's history. Hundreds of officers, detectives, and even federal agents were involved. They interviewed thousands of people, from Hollywood bigwigs to drifters, chasing down every possible lead. Elizabeth, it turned out, had a complex and somewhat nomadic life. She moved frequently, had many acquaintances, and a string of men she had dated or corresponded with. This created a vast and tangled web of potential suspects, making the investigation incredibly difficult. The killer, far from staying silent, seemed to revel in the attention. About a week after the body was found, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call. The caller claimed to be the murderer and offered to send some of Elizabeth's belongings as proof. A few days later, a package arrived. Inside were Elizabeth Short's social security card, her birth certificate, photographs, and an address book with some names torn out. The items were all wiped clean with gasoline, erasing any potential fingerprints. This taunting move only deepened the mystery and heightened the public's fear and fascination. The killer even sent more letters, taunting the police with phrases like, "I will give up in Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." But he never did give up, and they never could find him. Over the years, the list of suspects grew to an astonishing number. More than 150 people were seriously considered at one point or another. The list included doctors who would have the surgical skill to perform the bisection, jilted lovers, and even some well-known Hollywood figures. One of the most prominent suspects was a man named George Hodel, a respected physician with a dark side. His own son, a retired LAPD detective, later wrote a book accusing his father of the crime. It's presenting a compelling case built on circumstantial evidence, including handwriting analysis and alleged confessions recorded on secret police tapes. However, no charges were ever filed against Hodel, and he moved overseas, taking any secrets he had to the grave. Another popular theory pointed to a man named Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived just 1 block from where Elizabeth's body was discovered. His daughter later came forward, claiming she witnessed disturbing events at their home around the time of the murder. But with Bailey long deceased, confirming these suspicions proved impossible. Dozens of others confessed to the crime over the years, but they were all dismissed as glory seekers or mentally unstable individuals. Each confession was a dead end, another false dawn and a case shrouded in darkness. The investigation was also plagued by the sensationalist journalism of the era. Newspapers printed unverified rumors, withheld evidence for exclusives, and painted a picture of Elizabeth Short that was often more fiction than fact. They portrayed her as a promiscuous party girl, a teaser who led men on. A narrative that might have been more about selling papers than finding the truth. This media frenzy complicated the police work and forever colored the public's perception of Elizabeth. The real woman, a daughter, a sister, someone with hopes and fears, was lost beneath the lurid headlines of the Black Dahlia myth. Decades have passed, but the case remains officially unsolved. The files are cold, the original investigators are long gone, and the trail has all but vanished. Yet the story endures. It has inspired countless books, movies, and TV shows, becoming a permanent fixture in American true crime lore. Why does it still captivate us? Perhaps it's the stark contrast between the glamour of Hollywood and the sheer brutality of the crime. Perhaps it's the image of the unknown killer, a monster who committed a horrific act and then simply melted back into society, never to be held accountable. Or perhaps it's because, at the heart of it all, is a young woman whose dream of stardom was twisted into an eternal nightmare. Elizabeth Short came to Hollywood seeking a name for herself. Tragically, she achieved that fame only in death, as the enigmatic Black Dahlia. Her killer remains a ghost, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved, haunting us from the shadows of the past. Have you ever looked up at the sky and worried about what might fall down? Rain, snow, maybe a stray bird feather? Well, how about meat? It sounds like something out of a bizarre horror movie. But on March 3rd, 1876, the skies over Bath County, Kentucky, opened up and rained down chunks of flesh. This wasn't a drizzle. It was a shower of meat that covered an area about 100 yards long and 50 yards wide. Today, we're diving into one of history's weirdest weather events, the Great Kentucky Meat Shower. What was it? Where did it come from? And why are we still talking about it almost 150 years later? Stick around because this story gets weirder with every bite. It was a perfectly clear, crisp morning near the small settlement of Olympia Springs. A farmer's wife, Mrs. Crouch, was outside making soap in her yard. Suddenly, she felt something land on her shoulder. She looked down and saw a piece of what looked like fresh meat. Then another piece fell, and another. For several minutes, the sky just rained meat. The pieces were described as being between 2 to 4 inches square, looking like beef and feeling grisly and fresh. Imagine her shock, standing there as her quiet homestead turned into the world's most unsettling barbecue prep zone. She was completely bewildered. There were no clouds in the sky, no planes overhead. This was 1876. After all, just a clear blue expanse from which flesh was mysteriously falling. News of the meat shower spread like wildfire. Locals, naturally, were fascinated and a little freaked out. And what's the first thing you do when mysterious meat falls from the sky? You taste it, of course. 2 men, whose names are now lost to history, but whose bravery or foolishness is legendary, decided to cook up a piece. They reported that it tasted like mutton, or perhaps venison. Another local, a hunter, tasted it raw and declared it was definitely bear meat. So now we have 3 different opinions: mutton, venison, and bear. The mystery was only deepening. Who ordered this celestial meat platter, and why couldn't they agree on the flavor? The event was so strange that it quickly went from local gossip to a national scientific curiosity. Newspapers across the country, including the New York Times, picked up the story. The headline, "A shower of meat must have sold a lot of papers that week." Scientists were intrigued. This wasn't some tall tale from the backwoods. There were dozens of witnesses and physical evidence scattered all over the ground. Samples of the mysterious meat were carefully collected and preserved in alcohol. They were sent off to chemists and microscopists across the country for analysis. The world wanted answers. Was this a prank, a miracle, or a sign of something truly bizarre happening in the natural world? The scientific community was on the case, ready to put this fleshy rain under the microscope. The first serious investigation was led by a man named Leopold Brandeis. After examining a sample, he claimed the meat was something called nostoc. Nostoc is a type of cyanobacteria that, when it rains, can swell up into a gelatinous, flesh-like blob. It's sometimes called star jelly or witch's butter. For a moment, this seemed like a plausible, if still weird, explanation. Maybe there was a large deposit of this bacteria on the ground, in a freak weather event, like a whirlwind, lifted it into the air, and then dropped it. It would explain the lack of clouds and the sudden appearance. The nostoc theory was clean, scientific, and didn't involve any flying animals. It was a neat little package, but it had one major flaw. The samples looked and felt like tissue, not gelatinous bacteria. Other scientists were about to blow this theory wide open. Enter Dr. Alan McLean Hamilton and Dr. J.W.S. Arnold. Two other prominent scientists who got their hands on samples of the Kentucky meat. They conducted a much more thorough analysis. Looking through their microscopes, they found something undeniable: muscle tissue, cartilage, and lung tissue. This was not bacteria. This was, without a doubt, animal flesh. Specifically, Dr. Arnold identified the tissue as coming from the lung of a horse or perhaps a human infant. Yes, you heard that right. The human infant part understandably caused a stir, but it was most likely based on the underdeveloped state of the lung tissue. The more likely candidate was a horse. This discovery completely debunked the nostoc theory. The meat shower was real animal tissue. The question was no longer what it was, but how it got there. With the nostoc theory out, a new and frankly much grosser explanation took center stage. This one came from Dr. Charles F.A. Brindley, a professor at the Louisville College of Pharmacy. His theory focused on a creature that Kentucky has in abundance: vultures. Vultures, also known as buzzards, have a particularly charming habit. When they're startled or feel threatened, especially after a big meal, they vomit. It's a defense mechanism. By lightening their load, they can take off and escape danger more quickly. Dr. Brindley proposed that a large flock or kettle of vultures had flown over Bath County after feasting on a dead animal or a few dead animals, likely horses, as suggested by the tissue samples. Something must have spooked them all at once, causing a synchronized, mid-air regurgitation event. This vulture theory has become the most widely accepted explanation for the Kentucky meat shower. It accounts for the type of tissue found, the lack of a storm, and the sudden localized nature of the event. A kettle of vultures, flying high enough to be invisible from the ground, all getting startled at the same time, would create exactly the kind of fleshy downpour that Mrs. Crouch witnessed. It's a disgusting image, but it makes a certain kind of logical sense. A group of vultures circling a thermal updraft could have been startled by, well, we don't know what. Maybe a sudden change in air pressure, or one startling another, creating a chain reaction. The result: a rain of partially digested horse meat all over an unsuspecting Kentucky farm. It's a far cry from a miracle, but it's a powerful example of nature's sometimes messy and bizarre reality. But even the vulture theory isn't perfect. It leaves a few nagging questions unanswered. First, why did no one see the vultures? Vultures are large birds. A flock big enough to drop that much meat should have been visible, even at a high altitude. Second, the sheer volume of meat is staggering. Witnesses describe the shower covering an area the size of a football field. That would require a massive number of vultures, all vomiting in perfect unison. Is that even possible? And third, the state of the meat. It was described as fresh, not partially digested. Vulture's stomach acid is incredibly strong. You'd expect the meat to be more broken down. These lingering questions have kept the Kentucky meat shower in the realm of legendary unsolved mysteries. While the vulture theory is the best we've got, it's not a slam dunk. So, if not vultures, what else could it be? Over the years, people have come up with all sorts of alternative ideas, ranging from the plausible to the outright fantastical. Some have stuck with the whirlwind theory, suggesting a small tornado or dust devil passed over a butcheress shop or a site where animals had been recently slaughtered, sucking up the scraps and depositing them miles away. This could explain the freshness of the meat. Others have leaned into more paranormal explanations. Could it have been a prank by some otherworldly entity? A message from beyond? And of course, in the modern era, you can't have a good mystery without someone mentioning aliens. Did an extraterrestrial vessel jettison its biological waste over rural Kentucky? Probably not, but it's certainly more exciting than a bunch of sick birds. The Kentucky meat shower remains a celebrated piece of American folklore and a classic unsolved mystery. It's a perfect blend of the mundane, a woman making soap, and the utterly surreal. It challenges our understanding of the world and reminds us that sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. It's a story that has been passed down for generations, a historical event so bizarre it feels like a tall tale. Yet the evidence remains. Newspaper articles, the scientific reports, and the preserved samples, one of which is rumored to still exist at a university in Lexington, are all testament to that one strange day in March when the heavens opened and it rained meat. What do you think happened? Was it a flock of vomiting vultures, a freak whirlwind, or something else entirely? Let me know your theories down in the comments. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to survive a plane crash? To fall from the sky and live to tell the tale? Today we're diving into the incredible true story of Juliane Koepcke, a 17-year-old girl who did just that, and then survived 11 days alone in the Amazon rainforest. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a testament to human resilience, knowledge, and the will to live against all odds. Our story begins on Christmas Eve, 1971. Juliane and her mother were flying on LANSA Flight 508, heading from Lima, Peru, to Pucallpa to reunite with her father, a renowned zoologist, for Christmas. The flight was already delayed for 7 hours, and passengers were anxious to get to their destinations. The plane, a Lockheed L-188 Electra, was known to have a spotty safety record, but for many, it was the only way to travel across the vast, dense Peruvian jungle. As the plane climbed to an altitude of about 21,000 feet, it flew into a massive thunderstorm. Passengers grew nervous as the turbulence became violent. Bags and Christmas presents were tossed around the cabin. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of lightning struck the plane's right wing. Juliane later recalled seeing a blinding light on the wing, and then the plane began to break apart. The roar of the engines was replaced by the deafening sound of wind rushing past her. Still strapped to her seat, Juliane was ejected from the disintegrating aircraft. She found herself falling, spinning through the air, 2 miles down towards the green canopy of the Amazon jungle below. She remembered the sensation of the wind, the strange quiet after the initial explosion, and the sight of the trees rushing up to meet her. The row of seats she was attached to, likely acting as a sort of helicopter blade, slowed her descent just enough. Her final thought before losing consciousness was that the jungle canopy looked just like broccoli. When Juliane awoke, it was the next day. She was lying on the forest floor, still strapped into her seat. She was alone. The silence of the jungle was a stark contrast to the chaos of the crash. She had a broken collarbone, a deep gash on her leg, a concussion, and her right eye was swollen shut. She had lost one of her shoes and her glasses. Despite her injuries and the disorienting shock, her mind began to work. She was wearing a short, sleeveless mini dress, completely unsuitable for the jungle environment. Her first instinct was to find her mother, who had been sitting next to her. She called out, but only the sounds of the rainforest answered back. After a day of searching the immediate area and finding only scattered debris and a few other bodies, she knew she was on her own. The hope of finding other survivors began to fade, but Juliane had a secret weapon. Her parents were famous zoologists who had established a research station in the Amazon. From a young age, they had taught her invaluable lessons about the jungle. Her father had once told her, if you are ever lost in the jungle, find a stream or river and follow it downstream. It will eventually lead you to civilization. This single piece of advice would become her lifeline. She found a small stream and began to follow it. The journey was agonizing. Her injuries made every step painful. The jungle was a dense, humid, and unforgiving place. She had no food except for a small bag of candy she found at the crash site. That was all she would eat for the entire ordeal. She drank water from the streams, making sure it was clean and flowing. During the day, she waded through the water to avoid snakes and other creatures hiding on the banks. The sun was relentless, and the humidity was suffocating. At night, the temperature dropped, and swarms of mosquitoes attacked her relentlessly. The gash on her arm became infected, and soon it was infested with maggots. Drawing on another lesson from her parents, she knew that some maggots eat dead tissue and can prevent gangrene. Still, the experience was horrifying. She would later pour gasoline on the wound to force them out. Days bled into one another. She encountered the jungle's inhabitants, crocodiles, stingrays, and venomous snakes, all of which she managed to avoid thanks to the knowledge her parents had instilled in her. She was constantly on alert, her senses heightened by the primal need to survive. The mental toll was immense. She was grieving the loss of her mother and the other passengers, battling immense physical pain and fighting off despair. Yet, she kept moving, putting one foot in front of the other, following the water. On the 10th day, her small stream merged into a much larger river. Then there, moored on the bank, she saw a small boat. It was the first sign of human life she had seen in over a week. She was so weak she could barely stand, but she crawled towards it, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Near the boat was a small, empty hut. She crawled up the bank and into the hut, where she collapsed, too exhausted to go any further. She spent the night there, and the next morning, she heard voices. 3 lumberjacks who used the hut as a shelter returned and found her. At first, they were startled, seeing this ghost-like figure covered in mud and blood. But they quickly realized she was a survivor. They gave her food, tended to her wounds as best they could, and the next day, they took her on a 7-hour boat journey to the nearest town. From there, she was airlifted to a hospital. Her incredible story of survival made headlines around the world. She was the sole survivor of Lanza Flight 508. Out of 92 people on board, only one, a 17-year-old girl, had lived. Juliane Koepcke's story is almost unbelievable. She fell 2 miles from the sky, survived the impact, and then navigated one of the most dangerous environments on Earth for 11 days with serious injuries and almost no supplies. Her survival was a combination of incredible luck the way she fell, the seat slowing her descent, landing in the dense canopy, and her unique upbringing, which equipped her with the knowledge to navigate the jungle. After her recovery, Juliane followed in her parents' footsteps, studying biology and becoming a renowned zoologist specializing in bats. She moved to Germany and dedicated her life to science and conservation, eventually returning to Peru to study and protect the very jungle that had almost claimed her life, but ultimately saved it. It's a powerful lesson in the importance of knowledge, the strength of resilience, and the sheer stubborn will to live. Juliane Koepcke didn't just fall from the sky. She walked out of the wilderness, carrying a story that continues to inspire and awe us decades later. What do you think is the most incredible part of Juliane's story? Let us know in the comments below. See you next time. Have you ever heard of a sound that can make you sick? It's not just annoying, like nails on a chalkboard, but physically ill? It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but for hundreds of American diplomats, spies, and officials around the world, it's been a terrifying reality.
Ow.
This is the story of the mysterious ailment known as Havana syndrome. Our story begins in late 2016 in Havana, Cuba. U.S. Embassy staff and their families started reporting bizarre and unsettling experiences. Some heard strange, high-pitched grinding or chirping sounds, often localized to specific parts of their homes or hotel rooms. Others felt intense pressure or vibrations in their heads. The sounds would sometimes stop the moment they moved, only to start again when they returned to the same spot. It was incredibly disorienting. But this was more than just strange noises. Following these experiences, people began developing a disturbing set of symptoms. We're talking about severe headaches, dizziness, nausea, memory loss, and cognitive difficulties, what many described as a persistent brain fog. Some suffered from hearing loss and balance problems so severe they couldn't walk straight. Doctors examining them found evidence of what looked like concussions or mild traumatic brain injuries, but there was no impact, no fall, no physical blow to explain it. It was as if their brains had been injured by an invisible force. As you can imagine, this caused a huge panic. The U.S. government, suspecting a deliberate attack, launched a massive investigation. Is it a sonic weapon? A new form of surveillance technology gone wrong? The Cuban government denied any involvement, and extensive searches of the locations found no devices, no acoustic anomalies, nothing. The mystery only deepened. Then, the cases started popping up outside of Cuba. U.S. personnel in China, Russia, Germany, Austria, Vietnam, and even in Washington, D.C. began reporting the same strange sounds and debilitating symptoms. It became clear this wasn't just a Havana problem, it was a global phenomenon. The list of affected individuals grew to include CIA officers on sensitive missions, high-level National Security Council staff, and even officials traveling with the vice president. So what could possibly be causing this? The theories have been all over the map. The leading hypothesis for a long time was a directed energy weapon. The idea is that a foreign adversary like Russia could be using a device that fires focused beams of microwave energy at U.S. officials. This microwave radiation would be invisible and silent to most, but could potentially cause the strange auditory sensations and damage brain tissue, explaining the concussion-like symptoms. Some declassified reports and scientific studies have shown this is plausible, suggesting that pulsed microwave energy can trick the brain into hearing sounds that are really there. However, other theories have been considered too. Could it be a sophisticated eavesdropping device that has a harmful side effect? Or perhaps a neurotoxin or pesticide? Some even suggested it could be a mass psychogenic illness, where the stress and anxiety of the situation caused people to develop real physical symptoms. But the physical evidence of brain injury in some patients makes the psychological explanation seem less likely for many of the cases. Despite years of investigation by the FBI, CIA, and other intelligence agencies, there is still no definitive answer. In early 2023, U.S. intelligence community assessment concluded it was very unlikely that a foreign adversary was responsible for a sustained global campaign using a weapon. They suggested that pre-existing medical conditions and environmental factors could explain many of the cases. But this conclusion hasn't satisfied everyone, especially not the victims, who feel their suffering has been dismissed. Many officials and scientists familiar with the evidence still believe that a directed energy weapon is the most credible explanation for at least a subset of the most severe cases. The debate is far from over. The story of Havana Syndrome remains one of the most perplexing geopolitical and medical mysteries of our time. It's a chilling reminder that in the world of modern espionage, the weapons of conflict might not be bombs and bullets, but something far more subtle and invisible. What do you think is behind it all? Secret weapon, an environmental cause, or something else entirely? The turn of the millennium was meant to be a time of celebration, but for one family in Tokyo, it brought an unimaginable nightmare. On the morning of December 31, 2000, the bodies of the Miyazawa family Mikio, Yasuko, and their two young children, Nina and Rei, were discovered in their own home. What unfolded next revealed one of the most bizarre and baffling crime scenes in modern history. The killer hadn't just committed this terrible act, he had made himself at home. After the crime, he lingered in the house for hours. He helped himself to food from their refrigerator, eating for containers of ice cream and some melon. Used the family computer, not once, but twice. The first time was shortly after the crime, and the second was hours later in the morning. He browsed the internet, even attempting to buy a ticket for a theater performance. And the clues he left behind were staggering. This wasn't a phantom who vanished without a trace. He left his fingerprints all over the house. He left his DNA on the food he ate. He left footprints from the specific sneakers he was wearing. He even used the bathroom and didn't flush, leaving yet another critical piece of forensic evidence. He left the murder weapon, a sashimi knife, at the scene. He also left behind his own clothing, a sweater, a hat, a fanny pack, and gloves. It was almost as if he was daring the police to catch him. From all this evidence, investigators pieced together a detailed profile of the killer. Ancestry on his father's side, possibly from China or Korea. They know his approximate height and build, even know what he ate for his last meal before entering the house. They created a detailed sketch of him. The sweater he left was sold in limited quantities, and police know exactly how many were made and where they were sold. They've tested over 10,000 DNA samples and investigated hundreds of thousands of leads. Despite this mountain of evidence, more than most investigators could ever dream of, the killer has never been identified. For over 2 decades, one of the largest manhunts in Japanese history has been ongoing. The case remains open, a chilling puzzle where all the pieces are on the table, but the final picture just won't come together. The question isn't just who did this, but how someone who left so much of himself behind could simply disappear. The Miyazawa family's home still stands today, a silent monument to an unsolved tragedy and a ghost who walked in, stayed for a while, and then vanished into thin air. Have you ever wondered what you'd do in a true life or death situation with no one around to help? Imagine you're a doctor, but you're also the patient, and the nearest hospital is thousands of miles away across a frozen wasteland. Sounds like a movie plot, right? Well, for one man, this was his terrifying reality. This is the incredible story of Leonid Rogossov, the surgeon who performed surgery on himself. Our story begins in 1961, at the height of the Cold War. A young 27-year-old Soviet surgeon named Leonid Rogossov was stationed at Novolozerevskaya Station, a remote research base in the heart of Antarctica. He was part of the 6th Soviet Antarctic Expedition, a team of 12 men, and he was their only medical officer. For months, life was a routine of scientific research and surviving the brutal Antarctic environment. The continent was heading into its long, dark winter. The sea had frozen over, and polar night was descending. The station was completely isolated from the outside world. No planes, no ships, no escape until the next spring. Then, on the morning of April 29, 1961, Rogossov started feeling unwell. He had general weakness, nausea, and a sharp pain in his lower right abdomen. As a surgeon, he knew the symptoms all too well. It was a classic case of acute appendicitis. He tried conservative treatments, rest, antibiotics, local cold, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. His condition worsened. His temperature soared, the pain intensified, and he was vomiting frequently. He knew what was coming next: a ruptured appendix. Without surgery, peritonitis would set in, and that would be a certain, agonizing death. The situation was desperate. Evacuation was impossible. The weather was atrocious, with blizzard conditions making any flight a suicide mission. The nearest other station was over 1,000 miles away. The team radioed Moscow for advice, but the answer was grim. There was no way to get him out. There were no other doctors. The only person at the station with the skills to perform an appendectomy was the patient himself, Leonid Rogossov. Faced with this impossible choice, Rogossov made a decision that would go down in history. He decided to operate on himself. Think about that for a moment. He would have to cut himself open, find his own appendix, and remove it, all while fully conscious. The thought alone is enough to make most people faint. He knew the risks were enormous. He could bleed out, his hands could slip, or he could simply pass out from the pain and shock. But the alternative was certain death. He began to prepare. He chose 2 team members to assist him: a meteorologist to hand him instruments, and a driver to hold a mirror so he could see what he was doing. A 3rd team member stood by as a reserve. He instructed them on what to do if he lost consciousness, how to inject him with adrenaline, and attempt artificial respiration. He laid out his sterilized instruments on a tray beside him: scalpel, retractors, needles, sutures. The operating room was his own small bedroom, and the operating table was his bed, propped up to a semi-reclining position. Around 2 a.m. on May 1st, the operation began. He injected his abdominal wall with a local anesthetic, Novocaine. Then, he took the scalpel. He later wrote in his journal about this moment, "My poor assistants. At the last minute, I looked over at them. They stood there in their white surgical gowns, whiter than white themselves. I was scared too. But when I picked up the needle with the Novocaine and gave myself the first injection, somehow I automatically switched into operating mode. And from that point on, I didn't notice anything else." He made a 12-centimeter incision. The mirror proved to be a hindrance. Its reversed image was confusing, so he abandoned it, choosing to work mostly by touch, without gloves. The pain was immense, despite the local anesthetic. As he cut through his own abdominal wall, he accidentally sliced his cecum, which he had to suture. He was sweating profusely, feeling weak and dizzy, and had to take short breaks every few minutes to regain his strength. His assistants watched in horrified silence, ready to catch him if he fainted. After about 30 or 40 minutes of grueling, bloody work, he finally reached the appendix. He found it was dark and swollen, with a black spot at its base. He knew he was just a day away from it rupturing. With painstaking care, he cut it out. He applied antibiotics directly into the peritoneal cavity and then began the most exhausting part, stitching himself back up. The internal sutures, the muscle layer, and finally, the skin. The entire ordeal lasted nearly 2 hours. By 4 a.m., the operation was complete. He had done it. It saved his own life. Exhausted but triumphant, he took some sleeping pills and finally fell into a much-needed rest. The recovery was astonishing. Within a week, his temperature was back to normal, and he removed his own stitches. 2 weeks after cutting himself open in the middle of Antarctica, Leonid Rogasov was back on duty, his life saved by his own steady hands and unbreakable will. News of his incredible feat spread around the world. He became a Soviet hero, a symbol of courage and ingenuity. He was awarded the Order of the Red Banner of Labor, one of the highest civilian honors in the Soviet Union. His story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the lengths we will go to survive. When the expedition finally ended and he returned home, he was a celebrity. But Rogasov was a humble man, didn't seek the spotlight, simply went back to work as a surgeon at a hospital in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. He continued to save lives, but he never again had a patient quite as challenging as himself. He worked as a doctor for the rest of his life, passing away in the year 2000 at the age of 66. Leonid Rogasov's story is more than just a medical marvel. 8. It's a profound reminder of human potential. When faced with an impossible situation, with no help and no hope, he didn't give up. He relied on his training, his courage, and his sheer determination. He looked death in the eye and said, "Not today." It's a powerful lesson for all of us. No matter how daunting our challenges may seem, sometimes the strength we need is already inside us, just waiting for a moment to be called upon. What do you think you would have done in his place? Let me know in the comments below. It's a wild thought experiment. Thanks for watching this incredible story of survival. Picture this: London, 1888. Cobblestone streets are slick with rain, and a thick, soupy fog hangs in the air, muffling the sounds of horse-drawn carriages. In the impoverished district of Whitechapel, a shadow lurks, a phantom who would become one of history's most infamous and elusive serial killers, Jack the Ripper. For a terrifying 10-week period, from late August to early November, this mysterious figure stalked the dimly lit alleyways, preying on women in the dead of night. His crimes were brutal, shocking even for a time accustomed to hardship and violence. The victims, all from the fringes of society, were targeted with a chilling precision that suggested the killer had some anatomical knowledge. The city was gripped by fear and hysteria. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, and every stranger was a potential suspect. The police were baffled. They launched one of the largest manhunts in London's history, interviewing thousands of people and investigating hundreds of suspects. But the Ripper was like a ghost. He struck quickly, silently, and vanished without a trace, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror and occasionally a cryptic clue. The media frenzy was unlike anything seen before. Newspapers, eager for a sensational story, splashed gruesome details across their front pages. They nicknamed the killer Jack the Ripper after a taunting letter, supposedly from the murderer himself, was sent to a news agency. This letter, along with others like the From Hell letter, which arrived with a piece of a human kidney and fueled public panic. Were these letters genuine or just a cruel hoax? To this day, nobody knows for sure. The official tally of victims is known as the canonical 5, but some historians believe the Ripper may have been responsible for even more deaths. The killings stopped as abruptly as they began. After the final, most gruesome murder in November 1888, Jack the Ripper simply disappeared, leaving behind a terrified city and a mystery that would endure for centuries. So, who was he? This is the question that has captivated criminologists, historians, and amateur sleuths ever since. The list of suspects is long and varied. It includes doctors, butchers, immigrants, and even members of the royal family. Is it Montague Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher who was found drowned in the Thames shortly after the last murder? Or maybe Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who suffered from severe mental illness and was committed to an asylum. Some theories even point to a woman, a Jill the Ripper, despite countless books, documentaries, and investigations. no one has ever been definitively identified as the killer. Modern techniques like DNA analysis have been applied to the old evidence, but the results have been inconclusive or controversial. The case files remain open, in a sense a cold case that refuses to grow cold. Jack the Ripper's legacy is more than just a series of unsolved crimes. He represents the dark side of a rapidly changing Victorian society, a time of great progress, but also deep poverty and social unrest. His story has become a permanent fixture in popular culture, a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters are the ones we can never unmask. The name Jack the Ripper continues to echo through history, a synonym for the terrifying unknown evil that can lurk just out of sight. What do you think? Who is Jack the Ripper? Drop your theories in the comments below. Have you ever wondered if one person could change the course of history? Not a king, not a president, but an ordinary person faced with an extraordinary choice. Tonight we're going to talk about a man you've probably never heard of, yet you might owe your life to him. This is the story of Stanislav Petrov, the man who, on a fateful night in 1983, held the fate of the world in his hands and chose to save it. It was September 26, 1983. The Cold War was at its absolute peak. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were so high you could practically feel the static in the air. Just a few weeks earlier, the Soviets had shot down a Korean civilian airliner, KAL-007, that had strayed into their airspace, killing all 269 people on board, including a U.S. congressman. The world was a powder keg, and everyone was just waiting for a spark. Deep inside a secret military bunker near Moscow, a Soviet lieutenant colonel named Stanislav Petrov was on duty. He wasn't a frontline soldier. He was an analyst. His job was to monitor Serpukhov 15, the Soviet Union's brand new satellite early warning system. This system was designed to detect incoming nuclear missiles from the United States, giving the Kremlin just enough time to launch a devastating counterattack. The night started like any other. The bunker was quiet, the mood was tense but routine. Petrov and his team were watching their screens, monitoring the skies for the unthinkable. Then, shortly after midnight, it happened. A blaring siren shattered the silence. A massive red screen flashed the word launch. The system was reporting that a single nuclear missile had been launched in the United States and was heading straight for the Soviet Union. Imagine the scene. Panic, confusion. The protocol was crystal clear. Petrov's duty was to verify the threat and immediately report it up the chain of command. If the report was confirmed, it would trigger an all-out Soviet nuclear retaliation. The end of the world would begin with his phone call. But something felt wrong to Petrov. He was a man of logic, an engineer by training. A first strike from the United States with just one missile. It didn't make sense. Full-scale nuclear attack would involve hundreds, even thousands of missiles to overwhelm Soviet defenses. One single missile seemed more like a mistake, a glitch. His gut was screaming at him, but the computer, this billion-dollar state-of-the-art system, was screaming launch. All of his training told him to trust the machine. His subordinates were looking at him, their faces pale, waiting for his command. The pressure was immense. Then, a second alarm. A second missile detected. Then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. Now the system was reporting a total of 5 missiles, all heading toward the Soviet Union. The situation had escalated dramatically. A 5-missile launch was still small, but it was far more plausible as a limited strike. The computer screen now read missile attack with the highest possible confidence level. Petrov had only minutes to make a decision. Every second that ticked by was a second a potential missile was getting closer. The military protocol was screaming at him to report. His duty as an officer was to report. The fate of his country, as he was trained to believe, depended on it. If he was wrong, and the attack was real, his hesitation would mean the annihilation of the Soviet Union without any retaliation. He would be branded a traitor, but his intuition, his human judgment, kept pulling him back. He looked at the other screens. The ground-based radar systems weren't picking up anything. There was no corroborating evidence. Could the satellite system, their newest and most sophisticated defense, be wrong? It was designed to be foolproof. But Petrov knew that no system is truly perfect. He reasoned that the system was new and might have bugs. He also knew that real Soviet rocket scientists were in charge of the system, not military officers like himself. He trusted their work but also understood the potential for error. He thought about the intense angle of the sun on the high-altitude clouds and the satellite's orbit. Could it be a simple atmospheric anomaly, sunlight reflecting off the clouds in just the right way to fool the satellite's sensors? It was a long shot, a wild guess against a computer screaming with certainty. In that moment of unimaginable pressure, Stanislav Petrov made a choice. He picked up the direct line to his superiors at the Soviet High Command. His heart was pounding. He took a deep breath, and he reported the alarms as a system malfunction. A false alarm. He was betting the world on a hunch, going against the data, against his orders, and against the entire military apparatus. Imagine the other end of that line. The generals are waiting, expecting to hear the confirmation that would unleash nuclear Armageddon. Instead, they hear a lone officer telling them that their multi-billion-ruble system is crying wolf. They questioned him intensely, but Petrov held his ground, insisting it was a false alarm. He had no definitive proof, only his own logic and a powerful gut feeling. For the next agonizing minutes, Petrov and his team waited. If he was wrong, nuclear warheads would start hitting Soviet soil at any moment. The silence in the bunker must have been deafening. Every tick of the clock was a step closer to either vindication or global catastrophe. And then, nothing happened. The minutes passed. No explosions, no shockwaves. No confirmation of impact. The world kept spinning. Petrov had been right. It was a false alarm. Later investigations confirmed his theory. The satellite-S sensors had mistaken the Sun-S reflection off high-altitude clouds for the engine flare of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Stanislav Petrov had single-handedly prevented a retaliatory nuclear strike that could have triggered World War III. He saved the world. So what happened to him? Was he hailed as a hero? Given a medal? Paraded through Red Square? No. The Soviet military was deeply embarrassed. The incident revealed a catastrophic flaw in their brand-new, top-secret early warning system. Petrov's actions, while correct, had exposed this weakness. He had also disobeyed standing orders by using his own judgment instead of following protocol. He was intensely interrogated by his superiors. They praised his decision in one breath and reprimanded him for improper filing of paperwork in the next. The event was classified as top secret, and Petrov was sworn to silence. He wasn't punished, but he certainly wasn't rewarded. His career stalled, and he was eventually reassigned to a less sensitive post before taking early retirement. He lived in obscurity for years, a quiet pensioner in a small town outside Moscow, his story unknown to the world. It wasn't until after the collapse of the Soviet Union that his story came to light. In 1998, his former commander published his memoirs revealing the incident. The world finally learned about the quiet, unassuming man who had prevented a nuclear holocaust. Petrov received several international awards, but he remained humble, never seeing himself as a hero. He would often say, "I was just in the right place at the right time. That was my job." Stanislav Petrov passed away in 2017, but his story is a powerful reminder. It shows us that in our increasingly automated world, human judgment, intuition, and the courage to question the machine can be the most important safeguards we have. In a system designed for automatic, devastating retaliation, it was one man's decision not to act that saved us all. So the next time you look up at the sky, take a moment to remember Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, the man who looked at the computer telling him the world was ending and had the incredible courage to say, "No, not today." Thanks for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the unsung heroes of history.